Hello, DM Geezer Jim here, continuing with our RTFM, our audiobook of the 2024 Dungeon Master's Guide. We are now into Chapter 4. Hopefully you guys heard my little bit of preamble, preface before we got into it, but now we're actually going to get into the meat and the taters, the ideas behind creating adventures, taking all the tools and everything that we've talked about so far, and also looking forward into future chapters for some references to start making an adventure, what we're here to do in D&D, right? Well, let's get into the reading. The next section we're looking at is called Lay Out the Premise, Chapter 4. An adventurer shares many of the features of a novel, a movie, an issue of a comic, or an episode of a TV show. Comic series and serialized TV dramas are particularly good comparisons because of the way individual adventures are limited in scope, but blend together to some degree to create a larger narrative. If an adventure is a single episode or season of a series, a campaign is the series as a whole. But while it's worthwhile to compare an adventure to these other forms of storytelling, remember that an adventure isn't a complete story until you play it. Your players are the co-authors of the story with you, and the events of the story should not be predetermined. The actions of the players' characters have to matter. For example, if a major villain shows up before the end of the adventure should allow for the possibility that the heroes defeat that villain. Otherwise, players can feel as if they've been railroaded, set onto a course that has only one destination or outcome, no matter how hard they try to change it. You might find it helpful to think about an adventure not as a narrative that arcs from beginning to end with little chance of deviation, but more in terms of situations that you are presenting to the characters. The adventure unfolds organically from the player's responses to the situations you present. A little bit of a sidebar here. Guide rails and railroads. Players need to feel like that they're in control of their characters, the choices they make matter, and what they do has some effect on the outcome of the adventure and on the game world. Keep that in mind as you're playing adventures. If your adventure relies on certain events, plan for multiple ways they might come about, or be prepared for clever players to prevent those events from happening as you'd expect. Otherwise, your players might end up feeling railroaded. On the flip side, players sometimes willfully disregard the adventure hooks you put in front of them and go entirely off the rails. See the respect for the DM in Chapter 1 and draw in the players later in this chapter for advice about dealing with this situation. One way to give players impactful choices is to keep multiple adventure possibilities available to them at the same time. If the characters have 2 or 3 things they can investigate or pursue, they have a meaningful choice. And if whatever threads they don't investigate turn into bigger problems, you've clearly demonstrated their decisions matter. The next section is the adventure premise. One way to start brainstorming an adventure is to imagine a situation that might pique the character's interest. For some D&D players, the rumor of a dungeon filled with treasure is enough of a premise to launch an adventure. A brewing war between 2 small nations, the death of a leader and the accession of a new one, a migration of dangerous monsters, the appearance of a comet, and the opening of a portal to another plane of existence are other situations that could lead to adventure. A simple premise might also boil down to a magic item the characters want is hidden away in a dungeon. Browsing the magic items in Chapter 7 can inspire you to create simple adventure seeds. Adventure conflicts. A premise can be a good starting point. Before you can turn it into an adventure, it needs a conflict worthy of the hero's attention. The conflict might be driven by a single villain or monster, a villain with lackeys, an assortment of monsters, or an evil organization. But it need not involve the forces of evil. It could be a rivalry or disagreement between 2 families, organizations, or nations. A looming natural or magical disaster, or even conflict within the adventuring party about how to pursue the character's goals. Given a premise of a dungeon filled with treasure, what conflict awaits the characters when they enter the dungeon? It might be as simple as hostile monsters want to eat the characters, or 2 rival factions of monsters inhabit the dungeon. It might also involve a rival or a villain hoping to plunder the dungeon first. It could be a rumbling volcano threatening to erupt and bury the dungeon, or 2 rival families claiming ownership of the treasure left behind in the dungeon by their ancestors. If you're stuck, browse through the monster manual until you find a monster that inspires you. Adventure situations by level. Use the tables in this section to inspire adventure ideas for characters of different levels, with the range of possible levels grouped into 4 tiers. You can roll on the tables and see if the result sparks your imagination, or read the entries on the table until you find something that grabs you. Levels 1 through 4 are for local heroes. The fate of a village might depend on the abilities of fledgling adventurers. These characters navigate dangerous terrain and explore haunted crypts, where they might fight ferocious wolves, giant spiders, evil cultists, flesh-eating ghouls, and ruthless brigands. Our low-level stuff. This is going to be a D20 table. Levels, the rolls 1 through 20 on the left column and a situation on the right column. Not going to go through every one of these bit by bit, but definitely they are suitable and they are good inspiration for adventure situations when you're first setting up building a campaign, or if you're just trying to mentally map out a campaign or an adventure. These ideas can help you do it. Certainly there is a random roll that you can make if you're really wanting to, if you're just stuck and you need to roll. Here you go. Some of the level 1 through 4 adventure situations are as follows. They could be something as simple as bandit activity signals efforts to revive an evil cult long ago driven from the region. If you rolled a 7, miners discovered an underground ruin and then were captured by the monsters living there, and your players may have to rescue these miners. If you rolled an 11, a contagion in a forest is causing spiders to grow massive and become aggressive. If you rolled a 14, an abandoned house on the edge of the town is haunted by undead because of a cursed item in the house. Or you rolled an 18, after a local fisher pulls a grotesque statue from the sea, aquatic monsters start attacking the waterfront at night. Maybe roll a 20 on this table. A new captain has taken charge of a band of pirates or bandits and started raiding more frequently. So we're using this table. Let me keep going. I'm trying to wait on the commentary. Hold on. Levels 5 through 10, Heroes of the Realm. At this tier, characters undertake adventures that might determine the fate of a region. These adventurers venture into fearsome wilds and ancient ruins where they confront giants, hydras, golems, devils, demons, and mind flayers. They might also face a young dragon that has just established a lair. Levels 5 through 10 equals possibly a young dragon. Again, we have a D20 table with a listing of situations, adventure hooks, adventure ideas, situations that you can build around or build into larger campaigns. If you rolled a 2, a rebel lures a monster to the cause with the promise of looting the king's treasury. That's for more of a political campaign. If you rolled a 5, a monster, perhaps a devil, a slotty, or a hag, is impersonating a prominent noble to throw the realm into a civil war. It's a little bit bigger of a thing. You rolled a 9. After establishing a lair, a young dragon is trying to earn the fear and respect of the other creatures living nearby. Maybe you rolled a 12, and a coven of hags steals cherished memories from travelers. You dropped a 15. A ship carrying a valuable treasure or an evil artifact sinks in a storm or a monster attack, and then ideally you have to recover that stuff. Or you dropped an 18. Rebels or forces of an enemy nation have kidnapped an important noble. It's up to your players to solve it. We drop a 20 on our die. A renowned group of adventurers never returned from an expedition to a famous ruin. So at levels 11 through 16, this is the level bracket for Masters of the Realm. The fate of a nation or even the world depends on the characters at this tier. These adventurers explore uncharted regions and delve into forgotten dungeons where characters confront the terrible schemes of the lower planes, cunning rakshakas and beholders, and hungry purple worms. They might encounter and even defeat a powerful adult dragon. At this tier, they broker peace between nations or lead nations into war, and their formidable reputations attract the attentions of powerful foes. So we're going down to a D12 for this situation, for these rolls, to see what ends up happening here. Okay, adventure levels 11 through 16, adventure situations. We're designing something for higher level play. Thank you. Sorry about that, guys. We're rolling a D12, and we have situations such as, we rolled a 2. A band of hunting giants has driven its prey, which is enormous beasts, into the pasture lands, affecting the local farmers. Or we rolled a 4. A long-lost journal describes an incredible journey to a hidden subterranean realm full of magical wonders. Expedition to Barrier Peaks hits that one. Thank you, sir. If you rolled a 7, a castle or city has been drawn into another plane of existence. Maybe you rolled a 9. 2 parts of a magic item are in the hands of bitter enemies, and the third piece is lost. Or you make it 7, and you have the rod of 7 parts. Sorry. An 11 has a tyrannical ruler outlaws the use of magic without official sanction. A secret society of spellcasters seeks to oust the tyrant. And maybe a 12. During a drought, low water levels in a lake reveal previously unknown ancient ruins that contain a powerful evil. Bigger adventure situations for higher levels. Finally, the Masters of the World. Our characters are level 17 through 20. At this tier, adventures have far-reaching consequences, possibly determining the fate of millions on the material plane and even places beyond. Characters traverse otherworldly realms and explore demi-planes and other extraplanar locales where they fight terrible Baylor demons, titans, archdevils, lichens, ancient dragons, and even manifestations of the gods. Our epic level, our top tier. So here we've got just a D10's worth of suggestions here. We rolled a 1. An ancient dragon is scheming to destroy a god and take the god's place in the pantheon. The dragon's minions are searching for artifacts that can summon and weaken this god. Or if we rolled a 3 on this rando because we didn't know what we were doing with our epic party, we rolled a 3. An ancient hero returns from the dead to prepare the world for the returns of an equally ancient monster. Rolled a 6. An artifact belonging to a god falls into mortal hands. Maybe we dropped an 8. A lich tries to exterminate any spellcasters that approach the lich's level of power. Or as a 10. 5 ancient metallic dragons lair in the pillars of creation. If all these dragons are killed, the world will collapse into chaos. One of them has just been slain. Dun, dun, dun. The next section is the adventure setting. Okay, this is still part of Layout the Premise, by the way. Many D&D adventures revolve dungeons. It should say involve dungeons. Many D&D adventures involve dungeons, interior spaces such as great halls and tombs, subterranean monster lairs, mazes riddled with traps, natural caverns extending for miles beneath the surface, and ruined castles. The dungeon section in Chapter 3 can help you craft a dungeon environment for an adventure. Of course, not every adventure takes place in a dungeon. A wilderness trek across the desert or a harrowing journey into the jungle can be an exciting adventure in its own right. Outdoors, dragons wheeling across the sky in search of prey, fierce warriors pour forth from a grim fortress to wage war against their neighbors, or ogres and trolls plunder farmsteads for food, and monstrous spiders drop from web-shrouded trees. Adventures can also take place in cities, towns, and villages, which are often no less dangerous than dungeons or the wilds. The settlement section in Chapter 3 can help you create a settlement where an adventure takes place. Sidebar, writing for yourself. When you're preparing an adventure to run for your friends, you don't need to write hundreds of pages describing each location in exhaustive detail. You can run a game with no more written notes than you'll find in one of the short adventures at the end of this chapter. So, the next section is adventure maps. An adventure location almost always benefits from a map, and the more thoughtfully constructed the map is, the more fun players are likely to have as their characters explore the location. Maps and adventure structure. An adventure map can take many forms, from a detailed dungeon map that shows the dimensions and contents of every room, to a rough outline of how one encounter might lead to another, depending on the route the character chooses. Whatever form your map takes, it functions as a flowchart, since each destination point, whether it's a branch in the corridor or a room with multiple exits, leads to new decision points. If their characters leave a room by the north door, you check your map to determine it leads them into a great hall lined with pillars where their fire giant king holds court. If they leave by the secret door to the southeast, you check the map and follow the secret tunnel as it winds to the hidden vaults below the great hall. There is a sample map. Appendix B contains sample maps you can use for your adventures or as inspiration for your own maps. You can also modify those maps to fit the details of the location you have in mind. The next that says map inspiration. The internet is a great place to find adventure maps that have been made available, as well as real-world building floor plans and city maps and other images that you can inspire for your map making. Bringing a location to life. An inhabited adventure location has its own ecosystem. The creatures that live there need to eat, drink, breathe, and sleep. Predators need prey, and intelligent creatures search for lairs offering the best combination of air, food, water, and security. Keep these factors in mind when designing an adventure location. If the site has an internal logic, adventurers can use their understanding of that logic to make informed decisions. For example, characters who find a pool of fresh water in a dungeon might infer that many of the creatures inhabiting that dungeon come to that spot to drink. The adventurers might set an ambush at the pool. Likewise, closed or locked doors can restrict the movement of some creatures. A dungeon infested with carrion crawlers or sturges would need open passages so these creatures can move about to find food. The common map symbols. This is what this is a nice little chart when you start drawing your own maps that can give you a key. Or if you're using other published maps and didn't come with the best key, this can be a good reference to understand what all of these symbols on a map mean. Adventurer inhabitants will be the last section we look at here in the premise. The monsters in any adventure location are more than a collection of random creatures that happen to live near one another. Fungi, natural animals, scavengers, and predators can coexist in a complex ecology alongside sapient creatures who share living space through some combination of negotiation and domination. Each creature's entry in the monster manual indicates the terrain types where that creature is most often found, and that book also includes tables listing creatures found within each type of terrain. Using that information, you can decide which creatures inhabit an adventure location within a particular environment. You can choose a range of creatures from common vermin to sapient inhabitants and terrifying predators and decide how they live together. Factions. Particularly in larger areas, groups of certain creatures might compete for resources. When these groups consist of sapient creatures, opportunities abound for the adventurers who enter these areas. Characters might ally with one group or play groups against each other to reduce the threat of the more powerful monsters. For example, in a dungeon inhabited by mind flayers and the Grimlocks that they rule, the adventurers might try to incite the Grimlocks to revolt against the mind flayers. Bring the NPC leaders of groups to life as described in the non-player character section in Chapter 3, fleshing out their personalities and goals. Then use these elements to decide how these leaders respond to adventures. So that's our first section in Chapter 4, laying out the premise, some useful stuff. Now, remember, this is supposed to work together as a body of work. We're going to read through all of the chapters here. I would like you guys to keep in mind as you're listening or reading at home that the 4 sections work together. Standing on their own, there is some good advice, but the idea is that we're building all of these together for a unique, a single unique package, okay? Your adventure conflicts and your situations by levels. Hopefully, if you're a brand new DM, hopefully you're using some of the pre-built adventures and you can see these concepts in action. But should you choose to go the hard way and hit the ground running and start from day one to make your own things, these can provide ideas for situations that will provide the framework for your adventure, right? A pack of gnolls is rampaging dangerously close to farmlands. What does that mean? Exactly what it says. This is the situation. How does that turn into other things? The farmers in the farmland that are impacted by it become the non-player characters that are given the quest. Pursuing the gnolls through the woods back to their lair leads us to the dungeon, which leads us to the encounters and everything else. So the situation, we're at the start of this. We are forming the ideas behind our adventure in this section of the chapter. We'll build into more here moving forward. The Masters of the World, the adventure set, each of these tables provide some good ideas and some good information, inspiration at the bare minimum for you to build your campaigns and your campaign worlds. The settings, the adventure map, this is definitely something that's going to matter. Everything takes place in a setting, and maps are the tools that we use to relate where the players are in relation to other objects. The maps are the tools that we're using to know when to describe something to the players based on their position on a map. So the adventure maps, the adventure setting, these are going to vary wide and far. As we saw, sometimes it can be a simple ruined tower or a windmill. Other times it could be the demi-plane of the domain of dread that leads to a portal into the abyss that leads to Pazunia, the layer of 1001 closets that leads to who knows where. Your setting's going to vary as your campaign develops, but definitely get used to using maps. So one thing I'm going to say here is the map inspiration thing. The internet is a great place to find adventure maps that have been made available, as well as real-world building floor plans and city maps. Do the creators of these maps a favor. If they're free to use them for free, man. But if people are, asking for $1 for a map, help the creators out. This is my personal commentary as a third-party content creator. Don't just go into the internet, pull up a Etsy, use your snip tool and steal the map and put that out there as your own. That's kind of crappy, man. If you need to make it, if you need to use it as inspiration to draw your own, use it for inspiration. But for the, in my opinion, if you're taking other people's work for use without at least crediting them or purchasing it, you're stealing. That's my little bit. There's a ton of stuff on the internet, and there's a ton of people that let you use maps for free. But pay attention to those resources as you start tapping into them. That's my last little bit of an editorial. I do like this section here, though. Bringing a location to life and adventure inhabitants. The idea that a dungeon is an ecology, okay? It's a working ecosystem. Old school D&D, first edition, second edition, we didn't pay a lot of attention in some of our dungeons to an ecology. Monsters that were living in this dungeon would typically be enemies with each other. Sometimes if you looked at a dungeon back in first edition, you'd wonder why there was anything left in the dungeon if the big monster got hungry and ran through and ate everything else. So pay attention to the inhabitants and pay attention to the ecology to make it immersive and believable for your players. There should be food sources, water sources, shelter. It is fun to put together a dungeon with a bunch of random monsters that have no business being together in the same dungeon. That's more of a fun house dungeon, but your players aren't going to be as immersed or engaged if it breaks believability. Does that make sense? If this dungeon has 5,000 creatures in it, there's an area drop of water in here. How did these things live and eat and drink? You might be as simple as putting a barrel of water here and there, a pile of rations, but make sure that you're accounting for an ecology, a living ecosystem within your dungeon that makes sense to your players, or makes sense to you, so it brings your players into this situation more. It immerses them and makes them feel like they're in a living, breathing environment rather than just open the door for the next monster. So we're going to go ahead and end the video now. This is Lay Out the Premise, Chapter 4, the first real section in creating adventures. Thank you so much for hanging out. Hopefully you found this section informative. Understand this, like everything else, is a building block. Unfortunately, you're going to have to listen to the whole book from beginning to end. I'm kidding. I would love for you to listen to the whole book from beginning to end, but we are taking it section by section. Likes, follows, subscribes, comments if you have questions. If you want to jump into a live chat, join us over on Twitch. We talk about a lot of these things in great detail in our Twitch chats. Find me, you can find my stuff, DMG or Jim. We're there 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Tuesday through Saturday, U.S. Central Standard Time. We'll see you guys soon. Thank you so much for hanging out. We'll be back for the next chapter.